Hello, thank you for joining us today for our Town Hall on Elections in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I am Dr. Diane Bragg from the Department of Journalism and Creative Media in the University of Alabama Department of College of Communications and Information Sciences. I'm honored to be your moderator for this program today. I first would like to thank Bob McCurley and his University of Alabama honors class on the Changing Electorate for organizing this program and providing questions for our panelists. I would also like to thank Dr. Matt Barnage's political communication class and my own graduate journalism history class who are in our audience today. We will begin with introductions of our panelists today. First, we have Ms. Pamela Rogers, who was appointed chair of the Tuscaloosa County Board of Registrars by Governor Kay Ivey in November 2019. Prior to that appointment, she's assisted the Board of Registrars office since 2008 as needed, especially during busy presidential election cycles. Next, we have Ms. Megara Bobo, who is the Tuscaloosa County Circuit Court Clerk and absentee election manager. She began working in the Circuit Court Clerk's office in 1980 and was elected Circuit Court Clerk in 2006. She has served as absentee election manager every year except 2018 when she faced opposition in the election. And lastly, we have Judge Rob Robertson, who was sworn in as Tuscaloosa County probate judge in January 2019. As probate judge, along with other duties, he handles all aspects of the probate court, including the administration of county-wide elections. He has a background in law enforcement, business management, disaster recovery, emergency management, as well as serving in the U.S. Marine Corps. We'll start off with each of our panelists giving a short synopsis of their duties, what they do within their positions that they hold. And during that time, any of our panelists can chime in on topics that may come up within that synopsis. And then we'll open it up afterwards for some further discussion and follow that with some questions from our audience that we have. So we'll begin with Ms. Rogers, who will tell us a little bit about what she does.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here with all of you students who are interested in the election process. So it really starts with my office because we oversee voter registration. And as Ms. Bragg said, I worked in the Board of Registrars as like part-time help through various election cycles, since 2008. So I've gotten to know, even though I've not been appointed that long, I've gotten to know a lot in that time. The process begins with registering to vote, and obviously you all know you have to be 18 years of age or older to vote, and there are certain felony convictions that will prohibit someone from voting. So I work with the felons that come in that want their rights restored. I give them information, send them to the Board of Pardons and Paroles, and then they're able to, some of them get their rights restored. That's a process, and I always tell everyone it's not necessarily a quick process because it's a process and it takes time. And so I work with people like that, and basically, I tell people I am only responsible for Tuscaloosa County. I was appointed for Tuscaloosa County, so people ask questions a lot about what's going on in the world, and I can speak for my county, and the three of us, we work closely together, and I can speak for Tuscaloosa County that we have a really good process, we have a good system. We do our due diligence to make sure that anyone who wants to be registered can be registered. If they are not able to be registered, if they're dead, if they're whatever, we follow the law, and we make sure that only those who are duly registered to vote can vote in our elections. I have people call my office quite often, and they'll tell me, well, my grandfather died or so-and-so died. I would like to know if they're still on your voting rolls. And they'll tell me things like, I keep hearing that dead people vote. And of course, I know when I pull them up, there's a 99.99% chance that they're already disqualified because if we do our due diligence and we get every month or every week, actually, we get a list. And so I disqualify people who've died. Felons. So there's a lot of little parts and pieces that go into this, but the main role that I have is making sure that our voter rolls stay clean and that only people who are duly registered can vote, and those that are not registered, and we have cutoff times too, and I can talk about that. Didn't know exactly
We'll probably
what.
move into that in a minute.
Yeah.
One thing, let me ask you this, since you brought up about felons, and I know that's been an issue in other states. How does someone go about finding out whether or not their conviction is something that would prohibit them from voting, or if they're how to get back on the roll? Do they just call your office, or is there an online form they can do that with?
Well, there is. People come to my office, people call my office, and I have a paper with all of that information, and I refer them to the Board of Pardons and Paroles. Now, when I've had people come in and they say, I don't think I can vote because I have a felony conviction, but all felony convictions are not moral turpitude. And so convictions that are moral turpitude prohibit a person from voting. And so we have a list, and that list was revised in 2017. And so on that list, if what they've committed, the crime they've committed, if it's on that list, then they are not eligible until they possibly get their rights restored. But there are certain crimes of moral turpitude that, rape, incest, murder, that you cannot get those rights restored. And so there is it's called SERVE. It's a certificate of restoration of rights. And so people tell me all the time, I've done my time, but there is a process. So they have to fill out the paperwork, make sure that their fines are, they're up to date, and go through the Board of Pardons and Paroles, and then I do what they tell me to do. So.
Right, excellent. Okay. Well, we'll move on then to Ms. Bobo. I know you have a lot of hats that you wear over at the court. So, but today, whatever would apply to this, and specifically absentee ballots, right?
I am serving as the absentee election manager, and the first thing you do to be able to get an absentee ballot is fill out an application and submit your ID. I have a copy of the application, and on the back are the crimes involving moral turpitude that, if you've been convicted of, that you can't vote for. But once you fill out your application, submit your ID with your application, I can mail your ballot, or you may walk in my office between the hours of 8 and 5, Monday through Friday, as long as the courthouse is open. I think some of the state and county holidays coincide and some don't. So if the courthouse is not open, I can't have my office open. But you can come in and vote, show your ID, fill your application out, and vote while you're there. The last day to apply, I believe it's November 3rd for walk-ins and November 1st for the mail-in.
Okay.
So.
Okay. All right, and then we'll move on to Judge Robertson, who takes care of a lot of things involved with elections here. I guess when you talk about where the buck stops, I guess this would be right here, right?
In many cases, that is true. I serve as the chief elected official, and I'm ultimately responsible for the elections in Tuscaloosa County. I'm just a piece of the puzzle. We have a tremendous team of not only volunteer poll workers and supervisors and inspectors, but I'm one of 3 members of the canvassing board. I serve along with our circuit clerk, absentee ballot manager, Ms. Megara Bobo, and our sheriff, Ron Abernathy. So we are the 3 that make up our canvassing board that ultimately have dedicated responsibilities in all the elections that are held countywide here in Tuscaloosa County. Elections across Alabama are similar. We all follow the same law. However, we know the process here, the way it's done in each election, of course, can speak to that with full authority. But I think you'll find all over Alabama that elections and the duties are very similar. The equipment and whatever we discussed today is very similar across the state of Alabama.
Okay. We talk a lot, they've mentioned here following, the laws of like this county, but everything follows the laws of the state of Alabama, right? So are there any issues that you've seen come up with that with someone from another county who tries to say something is different, or any problems you come up with people moving in not understanding that, and how do you deal with that when that occurs?
Well, I will say that elections are different all over the country. And of course, in Tuscaloosa, we're blessed to have a lot of folks, and we may have a lot of students here that are from other states. The machines may vary, the process may be a little different, the laws may be different in those states, but at the end of the day, everyone gets the opportunity to cast a vote. And the similarities are we count every vote, we make sure that that's recognized, and it is the one opportunity that we all have to get out and say our piece. And I can't encourage people enough, regardless of age, get registered and please get out and vote every opportunity you get.
One thing that we had talked a little bit about when we met earlier is a lot of people don't understand or realize how they can volunteer to work at a poll and how that is such an important duty, and how you need people. I don't know if each of you or who would like to speak a little bit to that.
Well, I'd be glad to, because we are recruiting right now. So it's a great time. Students, wonderful opportunity. If you want to learn what elections are really like, how it works, ground truth, this is a great way to do it. It's a long day, but the opportunities to learn and see real world how the process works, I don't think you can beat volunteering as a poll worker. For this particular county, we have approximately 227,000 population. We will have 54 polling locations in this county. It's a large county geographically speaking, 54 voting locations as I stated. We will have somewhere probably 540 poll workers to run the midterm elections. Now most of those, they're hired for that purpose. Some of them have served a long time, others are new, but we're recruiting. We're always trying to get people that are willing to do their civic duty. You will not get rich being a poll worker. There is a little bit of compensation, much like jury duty, but it is a great way to do your civic duty, and you sure learn a lot.
What if a student is registered out of state, but they're here and they would like to help with the polls? Can you do that if you are not registered to vote in that county?
And the registration from out of state, you do have to be a qualified elector in this county, to work a poll, but I know you deal with a lot of the out-of-state questions, so.
Yeah, I was going to say, can I speak to that? Yes, as students at the university, at any of the colleges here in Tuscaloosa, or any, you can register to vote here in Tuscaloosa County if you wish to cast your vote in Tuscaloosa County. You can use your mailing address as your home address back home, but your domicile or your residence where you lay your head to sleep at night, that is where you're supposed to vote. And so students can register and use their Alabama address, and they can vote in the in the county of Tuscaloosa, or they can choose to vote back home, of course, and vote by absentee. So sometimes students ask me, well, what should I do? Because people will send, this may sound crazy, but I get forms in where students will list their place where they live in Georgia or in New Jersey, and they send it to me, and so I call them and I say, do you want to vote in Tuscaloosa? Yeah. I said, well, I need your address in Tuscaloosa. So then I have to send them another form, and they fill it out. And so it's a different, when you're dealing with students, they can vote one place or the other. But it's a great opportunity if you are voting here in Tuscaloosa County to work the polls, as Judge Robertson has said, and you'll learn a lot. So,
for students, I think you're used to, with everything on campus, you have your permanent address, which is considered, where your family is, and then your local address. So for the purposes of this, your local address is what you would need to use.
You don't live in your MSC University Station box. You cannot vote from there. So
very good.
Right,
you can't vote from your box.
Yeah, you can use that as your mailing address, but it's kind of a joke. I have to call people all the time. I need your address.
Your physical
address. I gave
address.
it to you,
Right.
and so your physical address, where you lay your head down to sleep at night, that is your residence, and you vote from there.
And your vote is mutually exclusive. You've got to pick one or the other.
Right.
You can't vote at home and try to vote here. So, just to make that clear, of course, you just pick one or the other, and whatever works best for you so you can get your vote cast. Some students are going home. They just want to do it at home. That works, but whatever it takes just to get that vote, but please vote.
I've had a couple students come in like the day before or the day of the last day and want to vote absentee, but they weren't registered here, but they thought they could still vote here, even though they're registered to vote. But I explained to them, and one girl just broke down and cried because she was going to miss voting.
Speaking of, can I mention
Yes,
one more thing about students? We are having a voter registration drive here on campus in front of the, started to say the FERG, the Student Center.
I still call it that.
Yes, in front of the Student Center, and that will be hosted by our college Democrats and college Republicans working together along with my office. And we'll do that, and that is October 20th, and probably like 10 to 2.
Okay,
So,
okay, excellent,
but I
great.
wanted to mention
so you
that,
could go to
so-
the quad and the students get your flu shot, you get registered to vote, do everything. One-stop shopping, yeah, that's great. One thing that y'all brought up that I think students do need to pay close attention to is there are differences in deadlines in different states. So don't think just because your state's deadlines are one thing that they're going to be the same here. You need to be really careful about that because you might be a little bit surprised. For absentee voting, a little bit maybe more detail about how to go about doing that. I told Ms. Bobo the first time I met her that I had talked to her on the phone a few times because I helped my parents and an elderly neighbor who had to absentee vote. And I can attest to the fact that they do call you back. So I left messages and everything worked out fine, but there's some things that you would like to suggest that you see common mistakes or whatever?
If they have, a lot of people are applying by mail and they're not sending their ID back, and that's a problem because I have to send it back and say, have to have your ID, and then they have to mail it back. It's just a lot of wasted time. To me, the applications are a little bit confusing because like the first one, you're going to be out of the county, it has nothing afterwards. The second one, physically incapacitated, it says ID required. Well, it shouldn't say that on any of them unless, it should say ID required or ID not required like it does on a couple of them. So it's real confusing.
So if you have some questions, you can check the website, and if you still have questions, call. And make
because
sure you know.
it slows the process down of getting your ballot and being able to get it back to us in time because we have to have it back in the mail by the day before or noon on election day. You can walk it in there the day before by noon on election day by mail. So.
What about elderly people?
Well,
So they're in age.
if you're 65 or older and have one of these medical conditions listed on the application, you do not have to have ID. So that a lot of people, don't have to have ID that are voting.
If I remember,
because
I think we did witnesses too. Is that right? 2 witnesses.
well, that's on the affidavit envelope coming back. That's
okay.
another thing. I had a lady get 2 people witness whatever they witnessed because she didn't sign or print her name. And so her ballot's not going to count. I mean, there's nothing I can do about that. Once it gets back to me in that shape, that's it. But they do need to completely fill out the affidavit envelope that comes with their ballot, sign, print their name, have it either notarized or 2 people witness it, and then send it back to me for their vote to count.
When someone shows up to vote, not that they're going to have problems, but let's say you get there and there might be, maybe your name is not on the list at the polling place where you are, you've made a mistake. What's good for someone to have on them when they go to vote, just in case they run into a little bit of trouble?
At the polls, you mean?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, their identification for sure.
Do you need to have some proof of address with you or something? Like what if your address is different on your license than where you're living?
As long as you have your ID, your driver's license, especially that involves students here again. You may have a Georgia driver's license, but you have an address here in Tuscaloosa County. So, as long as you have an ID, it does not have to match. Now, it has to, what we have on file has to match where you're voting.
Right.
So if you go to vote at the incorrect polling place,
Exactly.
and then when they call us, then we're going to tell them they're registered to vote here, because they did not update their address. And people really think when they move that we know where they moved to, and we don't. So that is, and I don't say that flippantly,
Right.
because when you move, you fill out a lot of paperwork, and but that's another common mistake that people make, and then they panic. And so, but we can talk later about provisional ballots, because that's one of the things that happens if you go to vote and you're not on the polling list there, then you can vote a provisional ballot.
Why don't
And
we
so,
go ahead? You want to speak a
okay,
little bit
we can
about
do that.
provisional
Yeah.
ballots? I don't
We
know
can.
if everyone is familiar with what those are and
Okay.
how you get one of those.
So if someone comes to vote, they go to a polling location to vote, and their name's not on the polling list for whatever reason. Many times they've requested an absentee ballot from Megara, but they said they didn't turn it in, or they mailed it. They don't know if it was received, and so they want their vote to count, and so they go to their polling location, and when their name is pulled up, it's going to say they're an absentee. So their polling location would be absentee. But if they say, well, but I didn't do that yet. So, I mean, I didn't do it, or I don't know if it's returned. So then they would fill out a provisional ballot. They have to sign an affidavit, fill out a provisional ballot, and then there's a process to that, just like with the absentee. It's put in one envelope, then another envelope, and put in a secrecy thing, and put in the provisional ballot box. That is not run through the machine. That is put in the provisional ballot box. And then when the canvassing meeting, we will get back together with the canvassing board, the Board of Registrars, and we have 1 week to review every provisional ballot, and we determine, does it count or does it not? And so, we do our due diligence to make everything count. And if it's supposed to count, it will count. But if they're just not registered, obviously it's not going to count. Then we will register them, because they will have filled out a form to register, there at the poll. So the provisional ballot will be added, to the count when we have the canvassing board meeting, and they will run those through the machine at that time, a week later.
Relatively speaking, provisional ballots are a very small percentage
Yes.
of what we end up with. The vast majority of voters that go to the polls just walk right in. They're oftentimes will just swipe their ID, their driver's license, or they'll key it in, pull them up. Thank you, Ms. Smith. Go to the next station, and it's just a very smooth process. But the poll workers and the supervisors are trained. They will do everything within their power to assist a voter. Sometimes they may be confused, a process or something, and they're at the wrong location. Oh, that's right. We're over at another polling place. They'll do everything to help redirect them, or call and verify, working with the registrar's office from the field, trying to make sure that vote, they're going to have the opportunity in most cases to go ahead and vote, at least provisional. But sometimes it's just, it's clear, there's something, and they get to go ahead and cast a normal ballot. But the poll workers really work hard, because if someone is at the polling place, we want that vote. They've made all that effort. We do everything we can to get that done.
When it comes to counting the votes, the process, we've talked a little bit about that before. Maybe you could speak a little bit about how the votes get from one place to the central location, how things are done.
Sure. And again, I know we probably have students here from various states. The machinery, the process does vary from state to state. In Alabama, and what we do in this county is what I'll speak to. Generally, we use a paper ballot system, which I'm an advocate for. This is the recommended system that states consider going back to, where you always have a paper copy. We use ballot counters that actually count those, just like a Scantron on an exam or something. But there's always that paper copy here in Alabama, which I like, because if there's ever a question, I can go right back. And I've got that hard copy where everybody filled in to look at, and have good data that we have as a backup. But the counting process, of course, you will go to the polling place, you will present who you are, your ID, you will get checked in, you will be provided your ballot. You have as long as you need to sit and fill in your ballot. You then walk over and you will feed your ballot into the ballot counter. Several of those in a row, just runs through, and you'll see your vote count pop up. That's it. After the polls close, there's a process where they run, basically close it out. If you've ever worked in retail and you run the register, at the end of the day, you run that report and that long printout comes from the receipt register. It's kind of the same idea. So they close the machine. After the polls close, they're authorized to then close the machine, and they start printing reports right there. There are hard paper copies, these long tapes that come out. They actually get put on the wall right there at the polling place. So there is a results of that polling place for all the machines stuck on the wall before any data ever moves. Our ballot counters, nothing's connected to the internet. They're completely standalone. It literally just spits the count out. They stick it on the wall. They then there's data sticks that come out. That's how we move the particular data. Comes out along with multiple other copies that were printed of the results, one for each major party chair, the Democrat and Republican party chairs, the executive committees that get a copy, the media gets a copy, the probate judge gets a copy. There's a lot of this for every machine that gets used, along with a data stick. And those data sticks are brought into what we call central processing at the end of the evening. We run those into the system. It's uploaded to the Secretary of State. In our county, we actually upload the unofficial results onto our website. So it's quickly, about every 5 boxes, we put a batch up, and you can see the results as it happens. We project them on a screen. We do, as much as we can to get it out as quickly as we can. But there's a lot of process that takes place, but the important thing I think to understand is how many checks and balances there are all through this system. And if there's ever a question, we can go right back. We've got those paper ballots secured. You can run those. It's, I think, the best way to do voting, to combine technology with good old paper, so you have the best of both worlds.
We mentioned some dates a little bit ago with the absentee ballots. When is the last day to register in Tuscaloosa County for the upcoming elections in November?
October 24th.
Okay,
is the last
October
day to
24th,
register
the
to
last
vote.
day to actually register.
Yes.
Okay. If you have filled out your form and turned it in, and then let's say they've messed up on an address or whatever, and you have to call them, are they still under that deadline if there's something that has to be corrected?
Yes, as long as it's in our office and we have it stamped
Okay.
by
Okay.
October 24th.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, great. And maybe share with people where the office is exactly, where they need to go. I've been there and for the first time, did some voting in person at the courthouse, I guess the last election.
Yeah. My office is located on the second floor of the county courthouse, left off the elevator and the first door on the left. And there's signs up, absentee voting, and there's a sign on the door that says absentee voting. So,
Okay. And the county courthouse is on Greensboro. It's not the big new federal one with.
Yeah, people
They're
get
on
that
University.
confused.
That happens a lot. I
county
get
courthouse.
questions. Right. Yeah, definitely. So don't expect to go into the federal one. They're not going to help you with that. So.
My office is in the courthouse annex, which is behind the courthouse, behind the sheriff's department. And I always tell people it's between the two Lurleen Wallace Boulevards. And, but people can register to vote online. Go to www.alabamavotes.gov, and it's votes with an S, and spell out Alabama. And there's even an app that you can get on your phone. You can call the office. Well, I mean, most students just would do it online, except you have to have an Alabama driver's license. So if you're from out of state, you would need a paper copy, or you can print one off online and mail it in. So there's a PDF that you can fill out.
Well, we've got some questions from students, but before we go, is there anything each of you really would like to emphasize or state before we get into those questions?
I think one thing I'd like to just make clear, because we're coming into midterms in this particular, when this broadcast, it's going to be a heightened time of information, misinformation, disinformation. Just please know your sources of information. That's all. Get the facts, and it's unprecedented, the amount of bad information that's being fed in different ways. And believe me, it's 360, but I just encourage you, if you have a question about an election, if you want to know an answer. Get to an authoritative source. Look at data. Don't rely on social media and, well, I heard this and we have way too much of that. This is the most sacrosanct right that we have in this country that people fought and died for. And to question the integrity of elections, and I know in this particular county, if there was ever an impropriety, I'd be the first one to stand up and say, ring that bell, and we'd be digging into it. But I just encourage you to be aware and know your sources of information as we get into the election season. Then we have a presidential cycle coming up in 24, which will be a whole nother round of information, advertising. Just know your information and the sources of that information. It's very important.
Yeah, we have a good process, and it really, from registration till the end, till the vote is counted. And we work really well together in our county. And I always tell people this: when we have a coach that we really like in this community, and he uses the word process a lot. And so I always tell people, trust the process. And I wouldn't say that if I didn't believe it. But we really, we do our due diligence. And so trust the process. That's what people call my office. And a lot of what I do now is to reassure people that we have a good process. There are times when I'll send them to the probate judge, to his office and, to talk and ask questions. But most of the time, I can answer their questions and just let them know we do have a good process. So trust the process.
And I'll also add that on election night, if you're ever interested in our particular county and the courthouse annex downtown, we will have Election Central. We'll be processing. We put it up on the screen. That's open to the public. You are more than welcome to come in and watch the whole process. If you ever have any questions, again, if you want to be a poll worker, we have 16 and above now where students can work. High school students can also work in the polls, which is a great program. So a lot of opportunity for service and learning. Leave that.
Do you have anything you'd like to add, Ms. Beverly?
Just another issue I've had with applications coming in, more than one in each envelope. We can only accept one per envelope.
Okay, one per envelope. Okay.
I highlight it before I highlight every one of them before I send it out. But I guess they just don't pay attention. But I have to send those back, and it just, like I said, slows the process down. And when it gets closer to the end, I'm afraid I'm gonna have people that are not gonna get to vote an absentee ballot because of things like mistakes like that. So if anybody has questions, please call my office.
If you're going to vote absentee, don't wait till the last. Go ahead. If you know you need to do that, go ahead. You can vote in person absentee. Likely I will do that because I work more than 10 hours on election day. I never know what an election day might hold. But you can just go right in, go into the office and get your vote cast now if you qualify for the need to vote absentee. So, but don't wait till the last minute because everything gets jammed up that way, and we tend to procrastinate. I know I do. So,
Students don't procrastinate.
no.
At all. No, that's not a problem. We don't have that problem, at least Alabama students. Anyway, so a couple of questions. These are kind of tied together. One is from Morgan, and one I think here is from maybe Will. Okay. Some concerns about the fact that young people often seem to be apathetic about voting. And maybe if y'all had any ideas or thoughts about, why that is, what we can do to maybe fix that, and what can these students do to maybe encourage their peers? You've already mentioned that there's a get out the vote kind of registration at the Student Center, but any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, certainly. It's not fair to just put that label on students or young people. We see that across all ages, genders, races. Our turnout in this county for the primary was approximately 17% of registered voters. The 2020 election was just over 60% in this county. And that's usually presidential cycles. You'll see heavy turnout. I mean, that's everybody wants to come vote. President's running. So that's leaving a lot of voters out of play. And that's not good. It's not getting better. It seems to be getting worse, where people oftentimes say, well, I just don't think my vote will count. You know, what difference is it going to? Well, it makes a difference. I don't know if y'all caught in this last cycle how close some of the races in Alabama. We had one county that was one vote making a difference. Your vote matters. And if you want to get out and be heard, I tell people, well, if you don't vote, you've lost your license to complain. So if you want to keep being able to complain, come out and vote, and make the best of that. But there's so much, and as a veteran, and there's a lot of folks that have just done a lot to try to make sure we keep that right, and people that have fought for that right over the years, and we should remember that. And I think it's really important that young, old, everybody make an effort to let your voice be heard. It's worth it.
And I don't know where the idea comes from, but every election I have numerous people say, these don't count unless the election's close, right?
Absentees.
Absentees, yeah. And I don't know where they get that idea, because they're counted every election, no matter what.
Generally,
It's just it's another polling place.
that's right. It's usually about the first polling place that we
That
run
comes in.
when they can close, and they'll have that, because we have to bring all the results from all over the county. So there's drive time involved and all that. We start processing. Usually we'll have absentee first. So yeah, the first box that gets reported is absentee, which gives you a good idea of how people are going to vote in the county. It's your first taste. So candidates are always, what's the absentee count? Because it gives you a clue to what may be going to happen countywide. So
We've got one question here, and this has been discussed a good bit across the country from Liam. People tend to think of easy access to the ballot box and voting integrity as two irreconcilable ideas. How can the American public be convinced you can have both?
I'll be glad to answer that. That's a very broad question. It's always a balance. You want to make it as easy as possible to vote for everybody who wants to cast a vote. But at the same time, the integrity of the process has to be maintained. Now, are there new ways to do things that come up? Yes, technology changes. We vote differently today than we did 20 years ago. We can handle far more volume more accurately than 20 years ago. True. Years ago, decades and decades ago, they were handling paper ballots, and you would hear of stuffing ballot boxes, and we've all heard these. Believe me, this goes way back in history of all over the world. It's not new. It's gotten far more difficult to do any kind of shenanigans in an election because of the technology and all those checks and balances that I spoke to earlier. So you can rely on the integrity, but again, we need to make sure we got to know who's voting. We got to know that Pam, if she's voting, it is Pam voting. It's not somebody pretending to be Pam. So getting that balance right will continue to be something that we'll discuss constantly. Just trying to make it easy, but accurate and secure. That's all important. Now, not getting into, the ideas of other foreign actors and influencing election. That's mainly information influence, but just know that that is a balancing act, and it's always a trade-off. And that's just like anything, your security on your home computer, it's a trade-off. You get tired of changing passwords all the time too, but you got to manage security and the integrity of it with ease of use, user experience. So that's true.
One question here, this is a good question from Allison, thinking about trying to get young people involved in the process. What brought each of you into the position you hold right now? What got you interested? How did you end up doing what you do? So Ms. Bobo, let's start with you.
Well, I started at a fairly young age in the circuit clerk's office, and after being there a long time, I decided to run for the office, and I wasn't old enough to retire at that time, and I had the opportunity to run, so I did, and I really enjoy my job. I love working with the public, and
What led you to work with the court clerk's office in the first place? Do you remember what you wanted to do, or just?
I was working at the bank at the time, and I heard there was an opening, and my
Okay.
dad worked in the sheriff's department, so he
Okay.
encouraged me to apply for it, and I did. So hadn't regretted it a day.
Well, I have been interested in elections and voting since I was like a little girl. My mom was a poll worker, and back then I didn't grow up in Alabama. I was from another state, but I would go and hang out at the polling place. It was at a civic center, and they had a playground, so I would go and hang out there. And I have a recollection of my mom telling someone or calling somebody on the phone, and now I know she was calling someone that would be like in my position. She was calling the supervisor of elections in the county that we were in, and they would tell her whether or not that person could vote. And this was, I mean, I'm old, so this was a long time ago. But, so I was always interested in that process. And then when I got old enough, I worked at the polls. And even when I was teaching school, I would take a day off and work at the polls. So I've just always been interested. And I love seeing and knowing that a process from start to finish is done in order, in good order, with integrity, and anything that I can do to be a part of that process. And so that's why I would work in the Board of Registrar's office before I was appointed to this position. And then that's what led, someone in that office to say, hey, you may want this position when it became available. So I just, again, I love the process. Mm-hmm.
I came into the role I'm in now. I love to serve. I love to solve problems. There's so much potential in our county and Alabama as a state. I love the challenge of trying to figure out new solutions and applying technology. Elections, I've always been an avid voter. All my life, I remember, I was talking to a group this morning, going with my mother to vote as a little guy. And I grew up in Florida, and going in, we had booze. You remember the hanging chads? Well, they had machines with levers and it punched. Yep. That's way back when. I remember that, but it was an important part of our household growing up. You voted on election day, and we weren't a very particularly political household at all, but you voted. And I got to see the importance of that, and they would reprioritize their schedule. So I think it's just something that I always would do. And of course, again, being a veteran and kind of working through the defense of that, I would have to be in really bad shape not to cast a vote. I just think it's the one thing we get to do that I am not going to give up that right. There's so many around the world that would die for the opportunity to do what we oftentimes just neglect to do in this country. And that's reality. So that's a bonus of the role I get to be in. So I actually get to work in that process and be part of the election day and all that. But I think it's a wonderful way to serve, and you can be a part, as we've stated, but be informed. I mean, just being informed, doing research on candidates, and regardless of outcome of elections, the campaigns are won and lost in the policy, the messaging, the get out the vote. You might not like the outcome, or you might like the outcome. I guarantee it's like when I make a ruling in court, one side of the table is not happy with it, and the other side of the table is really happy with it, because I'm gonna rule for one or the other, or split that. But please remember how important that opportunity is, and it's wonderful to get to be a part of it. And having a good team, and there's many others that we serve with, it's an honor to get to do it.
Got a question here from Morgan about voting age. Just sort of, do we think it should stay the way it is? Do we think we should make people older to be able to vote, or younger, or any thoughts on that at all? It's been settled. I'm trying to think when it became 18. Was it in the 50s or 60s when that was changed? I don't know. One of you may know, but I'm not sure.
I would not want to make it older than 18. I think 18, if you can serve in the military and pay taxes, and you ought to have a say in the way things are run. There may be other arguments for or against. I don't think making it younger, and frankly, I've got a 16-year-old daughter. She's, I don't think, ready to be a voter. I'll leave it at that.
We won't let her watch this.
But she is very informed and she's learning. But I think you need to be able to have the responsibility of being a voter. And at 18, where you can make all these other life choices. Of course, the age majority in Alabama is 19, but it's, I don't see any need to change that personally. I don't know how y'all feel.
To me, it was always like a rite of passage. You know, I mean, you have, you know, you can drive when you're 16, but then when you're 18, you can vote. And so I like, yeah, that is. So you can vote, so vote.
Exactly.
So,
Okay. Couple of questions that are sort of tied together here from Keegan and Haley about this process of ranked choice voting as opposed to runoffs, which in Alabama, correct me if I'm wrong, we do runoffs. And so maybe a little explanation about how those are different and which one you prefer, or just your thoughts on that.
Ranked choice voting, of course, it's being done in some states in our nation. I am not to a point of forming an opinion on it. The runoffs that we do, it creates a lot of work, I can tell you. But at least it is an absolute answer. People get to get back out and vote. I really haven't done the analysis to the point that I could have an opinion on that, but I'm very comfortable with the way we settle the runoffs here, and it's clear who won and who lost, and you can move on. So that'd be my answer.
yeah, I agree with that as well. I feel like we have a good system. I don't think it's broken. So
I did have someone just this past week at a conference that I was at who is from a state that does the ranked choice voting, which I've always thought was kind of interesting. And she made the comment that sort of the candidate that's the least offensive to everybody kind of won. Not necessarily the best in any, but that's the way she kind of looked at how ranked choice, who you end up with. So
I'm sure it's more efficient because, but
you're right.
at the same time, I'd rather let the voters decide. Get down to two options, let them go, state their piece, move on from there.
Right now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is statewide in Alabama, you can vote in any particular primary. Like if you are Democrat, you can vote in Republican primary. If you're Republican, you can vote in Democrat. So is that correct? Or
Yes, presently we have an open primary. There's a lot of talk of changing that, but right now, yes, you have that option. Now, once you make that choice in a primary, you have to vote the same way in a runoff. That's the
right.
But it doesn't matter. We don't register by party here. Don't have a clue to what party people belong to, or if you belong, you just don't register that way here. So you are asked that question in a primary in Alabama when you go in. You register to vote, yes, you check in, you go over to the ballot table, and you'll be asked in a primary, and it's like, which ballot would you like? What party would you wish to vote for? Democrat, Republican, or constitutional amendment, or amendment only, I should say, which is you don't want to declare a party and vote, you just want to vote on the amendments on a ballot. So those are the options. Runoffs, you just have to vote the same party. You can't cross over. Doesn't matter what you decide, but you got to stick with it if you choose to vote in a runoff. And lastly, in the general election, then you can vote however you wish.
Right.
And nobody will ask you, there's only one ballot. You have all parties that are represented. We'll have libertarian candidates on the ballot this November. Of course, Republican, Democrat, you have a write-in. You can always do write-ins. That's your right as a voter. We have interesting write-ins that we get. So that's always interesting to see the write-in summaries, where people's minds are when they're not real happy with their candidate choices. We get all kinds of interesting input.
Do we have to have, does one candidate have to have a majority to avoid a runoff? Is that correct? Okay, okay, all right, all right. Someone actually brought up, which this is interesting considering we have a case right before the Supreme Court as we speak, dealing with gerrymandering of districts, anything like that. Are there some changes that you've seen that might occur in Tuscaloosa County based on some of the possible changes with the district lines being drawn? I'll be honest, I have not looked at the new maps, so I'm not
Yes, relative to, of course, we're speaking of congressional maps.
right.
I think that's the question before the Supremes right now. Yes, it would affect some of those lines on U.S. House, I think is primarily, but not other county or districts. We have a lot of districts. We have school boards. We have county commission districts. There's a lot of different lines. It'd be nice if they all lined up, but they don't. And so any given election, because of all the different districts and who can vote for who, we may have 16, 18 different ballot styles. So the person has to make sure 25. So you got to make sure the voter's getting the right ballot style, which means, your neighbor can't vote for a candidate because the line goes down your neighborhood. So all that is part of the process as well, which we didn't talk about. But.
Yeah, that kind of leads to a question that someone asked, I believe it's Will, if you were to try to think of something that you thought might improve the process here in Tuscaloosa County, or is there any one thing that you think, that might make it better, easier? I don't know.
There is always room for improvement. Absolutely. The maps, like we're doing a lot of work bringing our geographic information systems up to new levels to get more dynamic maps where people can zoom in and see exactly all the layers. Our Secretary of State, who's done a phenomenal job in improving election technology, I know that we're benefiting from here, but the maps are important, making sure that's available when people need to check. I could probably ask anyone in this room, can you name all the people you can vote for that represent you on school boards, or you probably can't. And you need to be able to easily check that and say, okay, yes, that is my school board member. I've got an issue I want to talk to them about, making that easier. All those are things that we absolutely keep working to make better, and just getting the vote, making it as easy as possible. My personal goals, even during lunchtime rush, 20 minutes in and out. So there's no excuse. I mean, in 2020, the presidential cycle, all of our polls in this county, 54, closed by 7 o'clock. That means there's no line. So everybody who came out to vote was voted by close. Now, just so you know, please never hesitate because it's getting close to poll close to go down and get in line. Anyone in line when 7 o'clock strikes gets to vote. We put a placeholder in, and if there's a line, those folks still get to vote. And, so please understand that don't not go because you think you might not get there. Get in line, and if you're there before 7, you get to vote however long that takes. Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are not aware of that. They think, it's getting close to 7, I'm not going to make it, but go ahead and try to get in line. One thing that some students may face when they get in there to vote that we have in Alabama and other states, this is based on the way our Constitution is, there are often on the back of the ballot some referendums and things like that have to do with other counties and places and cities throughout Alabama. And I might want to see if you would speak to why that is and how can they best decide how they should vote in those situations when it has really, I know, it's a question I deal with as well.
Yes, and sometimes that does look a little odd on the back, and you're like, why would I be voting a constitutional amendment on a local for one county to do one thing in Alabama? That's the way our laws work here. In many cases, that we have to do a statewide referendum to allow something on a local scale, and it gets compiled, and that is part of the process here. Right. Just depends on what it is and what's required. But oftentimes and sometimes the wording on that can be, you have to read them carefully to say, if I vote for this, does that mean I want it, or does that mean I'm saying no to it? You have to read the wording carefully, make sure that you understand, if you care to. But sometimes we have several. On this ballot this time, we have
A lot.
how many?
It's all on the back.
Yeah, there's a
And
lot
It's full.
of these types of situations you read through, and some of them you're going to be like, I don't know anything about.
Are those listed ahead of time on your website where they
Yes.
can know when they go in? So I would say ask questions. Maybe there's one from Mobile. Maybe you have a friend from Mobile, and you could say, how should I vote on this? Get some advice that way. So
There's things that may affect statewide, like a bond issue for recreation, and that'll be something you have the opportunity to vote on statewide. But you will see those local things, and you're wondering, why do I care about the sewer system of
Mobile County.
ABC County? I don't. Why am I voting on that? But there's reasons in the way our laws work here. But that's what that's about.
okay.
And if you don't know, and you just not voting, you're not swaying it either way. If you just feel like I can't make an informed choice here, you don't have to vote on it.
That's one of those instances where not voting is okay.
Sure.
Right, if you don't
Feel
know.
like you have to answer something. You can. We have opportunities. You can vote straight ticket for a party. You can still, even if you vote straight ticket, go back and maybe you have one other party candidate. It's still going to count. It looks so. There's a lot of flexibility on the ballots. But if you don't know and you just would rather not vote, that's fine. All the rest of your votes count. It's completely up to you. That's your freedom as a voter to make those choices.
One thing I would say, there were a couple of questions on the list here about how to be sure that you're getting the right information. Make sure when you do go online that you are on the actual right website. That is a problem I'm sure many of you have run into with other situations where things will look official and look like a .gov, but it's not necessarily, so be very careful about that you are looking at the right place. And if you continue to have a question, I would say call. Like I said, I could say from personal experience that you will get the call back and get the information that you need. And once again, it's October the 20th, is that right?
We have a voter drive.
Right.
UA on October the 20th,
Right.
and that's just before the deadline. We'll get all those apps processed before October 24th.
And that's over at the Student Center. And what are
Yes.
the hours again for that?
10 to 2.
10 to 2.
10 to 2,
Okay, great. We're almost out of time here. Any last words you'd like to say?
I think that you brought up your last point, very important. Go to the authoritative source. Some of our seniors, there are things that will get popped up on their phone, or if they're on Facebook still, and it's, hey, you need to do something about voting or register here. You never know who you're giving information to. Go to the source. Don't do it off some pop-up. It's like answering a cold call or actually buying an extended warranty on a spam call. It's not a good idea, but just there's a lot of that out there, so go to the source.
Well, that's a good note to end on. Go to the source. We want to thank our guests for being here today. This has been a wonderful panel, lots of information, so round of applause for them.
Thank you.
And thank you again for being here, and thank you to our students for being here, for organizing this and participating, for all the wonderful questions. Thank you.